Hi, and welcome to Deep Leadership. I'm your host, John Rennie. Today on the podcast, my guest is retired Navy SEAL Commander Jack Riggins. Jack and I talk about his unique experience in the military and how he's using that background to help people during this current COVID crisis. This is a great conversation with a lot of powerful takeaways. So, are you ready to dive in? Let's get started.
Welcome to Deep Leadership. Leadership is a people business. That's the philosophy of your podcast host, John Rennie. As a former Cold War submarine officer who spent 20 plus years leading businesses in corporate America before starting his own manufacturing business, he knows that leadership matters. Are you ready for some real-world, actionable advice from John as well as his expert guests?
I'm ready.
The show starts right now.
Welcome to episode 15 of the Deep Leadership Podcast. Today I'm joined by Jack Riggins. Jack is a retired Navy SEAL commander and co-founder of Performance Mountain, an organization that helps people, teams, and companies develop an elite mindset and a winning culture. He's also the host of Darkside of Elite podcast, which is one of my favorites. Jack knows what it means to lead in a crisis, and with everything going on today, I'm excited to talk to him and get his perspective. So Jack, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. And nice intro. I'm a fan of what you do as well, because you're out there, teaching leadership from your experience and just spreading the word. And I think that all leaders can grow. And so if we have unique experiences, it's important to be able to share them in a way that people can, choose to take on board some of the things we've learned or go, that doesn't quite work for me.
Yeah, I agree. And especially now in times of, kind of a unique crisis hitting the country, hitting the world. It's been interesting to me to talk to various leaders and especially military guys, because I think that you can bring an interesting perspective, especially with your background. And so that's kind of what I want to start off with was, maybe tell me a little bit about your background in the Navy and then how it shaped what you do and what you teach at Performance Mountain. So that's kind of a unique, you're taking your experiences and bringing it to training other leaders and other teams. So I'm interested in hearing about that.
Yeah, I'll try not to go, waste the entire podcast time with my background, but I grew up in Nebraska. Small town of 25,000 for Nebraska. Well, in Nebraska, that's actually not a small town. And I went in and I played small college football for 2 years. I was really a big sports guy. I always like to tell people, I really went to school to do sports. At the same time, I kind of come from a military family. I had family in World War II, Korea, Vietnam. The father that raised me, my third stepfather, had just got out after Vietnam when he married my mother. And so he was very influential in my life. He was both a Marine and an Air Force man. But I wasn't raised a military brat. So I just kind of had that, I think, in and around. My brother also flew helicopters for the Army. And he's maybe 10, 11 years older than me. I had this interesting family. And so I just, I had that spark. And so I knew I wanted to serve early. And to be honest, I think with my sports background and besides, wanting to serve, I was looking for the next locker room, kind of a place where a group of people got together and would accomplish something. And, I know that some of the recruiting, SEAL team, attracted me. But I also think it was just my rebellious nature that we had very few people that had been in the Navy in my family, and being from Nebraska, it was intriguing. Remember the old posters, Navy, see the world.
Right.
And of course, there was some attraction to SEAL team is so hard to get into, blah, blah, blah. So I played 2 years of football and then kind of loved the football, didn't really take the school very serious. And I was like, I don't know if this is going to end up good, in my early 20s. So I found the closest ROTC unit. Navy ROTC was at the University of Nebraska, and that's where I went down and literally walked on, just kind of walked in the door and said, hey, where do I sign up? And did it and did NROTC, and that was great. And the Marines in the program at the time, some of the MESEP or Marines that were trying to become, Marine officers, taught me how to wear my uniform in March. I still, although I'm retired now, I always needed help trying to figure out how to do all that stuff. So, so it's good. I went into SEAL team. But yeah, the goal from day one was to become a SEAL officer, and graduated from the University of Nebraska, where I met my wife, which was cool. And she was like, yeah, what's that? What are you talking about? And, when we graduated, we were in the car on the way to San Diego to BUDS, or Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL School, in 1998. And, she still didn't know what she was getting into, and I don't think I did either. But I went through that, and, it's a fantastic experience or selection. That's, there's plenty of information out there. It's a very difficult selection. But I also say, I don't know that it's that difficult if you are that laser focused, and you need to be that laser focused for that, 8 months to a year, to become a SEAL or a SEAL officer. So, and that was kind of the genesis, is to find that next team and do something good with my life. Not that I wasn't doing things good, but I was very rebellious and rambunctious and getting in a lot of trouble. And so for me, it was just a great mesh, and ended up, obviously in SEAL team a few years before 9/11. Started at SEAL Team 1. Maybe only SEALs will get this, but SEAL Team 1 was kind of known as one of the, SEAL Team 1 and 2 were the original SEAL teams in 1962, and there was a lot of pride with that. But they were also very, used to call it Stalag 1. They had a reputation for not being very fun, no fun
okay.
1. Okay. Not to say they're not today, but anyway, in your selection of, hopefully where you wanted to go, this boat, that boat, SEAL team's the same thing. I had originally had orders to SEAL Team 3. And then I was like, no, I want to go old school. And, well, I did. I got my
You got old
changed.
School.
Yeah. And I went to SEAL Team 1. And that grooming period for a young officer, those kind of first 2 years after BUDS, what was an eye opener, because I kind of thought, like a football team, wow, you make it and you're on the team, and, and you get to play. No, you have the basic materials to be a SEAL and a SEAL officer, and there is a lot of grooming and mentoring and training that needs to go on before you're competent.
It's just you've got the basic competency
right.
to get to the SEAL teams. Like we had the base, like we got through nuke power school and prototype and submarine school, which was a year and a half. Then we had the minimum requirements to step on board, but we didn't know what we were doing at that time. Yeah.
So exactly. So I had no clue what I was doing. But what I will say is that the teams are not structured this way anymore. Generally, one master chief at a team now might be another one in waiting. But, I think we had 5 to 7 at Team 1 at the time. And some of them were tail end Vietnam guys. And I would, every day going in to the team, I was like, oh God, like I'm going to be fired. I'm going home. Well, I had no idea what was going to happen. But again, mentorship. And as I got into my first platoon, I really cherish that time now, because I was taught by, LPOs, E6s, because our guys do a really good job. And I think the Navy in general does in grooming the young officers. I mean, the officers have to groom each other, but the enlisted and certainly the chief petty officers, that is their job. And while I didn't understand it at the time, and it was difficult, a couple years later, I was so thankful for it, because they made me competent, and they made me understand, moral and ethical and technical and tactical decisions at a much higher level than I think some other places, in the community. And it was great. And I would go on to, some of them would become very good friends. And as as you gain rank in the military, some of them would quote unquote work for me.
Right.
So, so it was an interesting time, but what people don't know also is that SEAL team was undergoing a transformation, that just happened to coincide with 9/11, where, a lot of us were just out on, ARGs and MARGs with, floating in the Pacific with Marines, and, going to forward bases and training a lot of people. But what was the future defense posture? And so we decided to do what was called Force 21 and reorganize into almost squadron level fighting forces. And why? Under the Navy Special Warfare umbrella, you have SEALs and you had small boats, and that was it. And Admiral McCraven, retired, but at the time Commodore, kind of led that. And so there was this transition going on. And, I was in kind of the new guy group, 2 or 3 years where we were kind of getting the old school way. And then, all of this was supposed to happen in 2001, literally. And it was interesting. And people were talking about things that hadn't even come online yet, aircraft, not that we weren't qualified. I mean, I was a JTAC calling in airstrikes, but the squadron almost being, a war fighting unit and bringing attachments into SEAL team squadron to deploy, opposed to where, if on a submarine you had a special operations mission that needed some guys, we would come out to you and we'd work together. Well, the foreseeable future was we may have to take the unit and fight it, just like fight a ship. It's a very Navy type thing. Long story short, I deploy to the Pacific. 9/11 happens. And, right then and there, immediately the world goes nuts, and all kinds of contingency operations, immediately begin around the world. And, we kind of go from, I'll call it, playland. Oh, there's nothing going on, because there's nothing worse in SEAL team than training, and then not actually getting to do something. And so, participate basically from right after 9/11 until I redeploy in December in a bunch of contingency operations, which were great because you get to see the big picture of how the national architecture is moving chess pieces around the board. And that's actually when I was introduced to submarine operations. And like I said, one of the benefits of SEAL team is that for the most part, if you do it long enough, you're going to see probably every asset the United States has.
Right.
And there's just nothing like seeing a submarine in clear water in the day, you being like looking down at it. And there's nothing better than at night either. Although the little escape trunk you're like, oh God, I got to swim down to that.
Yeah.
And we weren't at a point in time right after 9/11 where we came off the normal deployment cycle like everybody else in the Navy. It was just like, we'll redeploy, we'll put a force forward, we'll go through rest and refit, boom, boom, boom. So later, I would go on after that because of the squadron reorganization and everything. We didn't have a home. And so I ended up spending the next tour, because we did disassociated tours to mature, at Special Operations Command Korea, which sounds so weird to people. And it was actually a great tour. Had my first son there, but at that time, the entire mission set was the nuclear program of North Korea and the North Korean leadership. So there wasn't too many frogmen there. So I got a high level, I call it high level behind the scenes access to secret compartmented programs going on nationally. And I was very junior. And again, this is where, for me, I met a lot of my green counterparts in the U.S. Army, and learned what they did, and learned the bigger picture of what would become really the counterterrorism architecture of America, although it wasn't in the full swing yet, like it is today. And so really, though, for a SEAL, that was kind of a down tour, but it was very broadening, gave me a giant strategic picture. I always had a lot of pride when I was one of 3 guys that could go pick up, you would love this, right? I could go pick up the messages. Remember the days where, everything still works on message traffic, especially in the Navy. But, this is the time where you had to go through like 3 skiffs and locked doors to get a message that came from Washington or the Pentagon.
Right. Yeah.
And I think people find that fascinating. I know in submarine, that's just SOP.
It's in fact, I've got a bit of a chapter on that in my new book about just breaking and decoding messages was a big part of what we did. So, and it was a story about me as a young Lieutenant JG, thinking I knew what I was talking about because I'd just been to the class in the school, and I and I sort of questioned my CO, which wasn't a good idea. So,
Yeah.
so I include that story in the book because it's one of those stories where you think you know everything as a young junior officer, and you realize right away when you're dealing with an 06 that he knows a lot more than you do. So
yeah. So it was real interesting. Absolutely. It's so funny because, I mean, when you're young, it's just the fact you're young and you're driving hard to be somebody in any organization. But you always think you have all the answers. And I certainly was one of those guys. I still probably am. But it was another great tour because, again, strategic level, and you don't always get to see that. It just depends where you're at and what you do. It also broadened my horizons to the Joint Special Operations world, which is really cool. And really, you have to begin to understand that and speak that language. So, you had the air component there from the Air Force. You had the Army aviation component. You had the green beanies and you had the command architecture. So I worked for a general. And like I said, I used to get so excited because I could read the message. And I had to decide if it was at the level that, I had to call ops and he had to call the general. And you don't want to mess up that. You don't want to mess up, and you're like, oh no, like, okay, wake up, honey, on the beeper. Okay, now I got to take it to the command and go in the skiff there. And it's like, I would just deliver the information, but I would watch the more senior officers deliberate of what was the right decision. Does he need to be woke up? Does he not? All I learned from that is if in doubt, wake him up.
Right. No, that's exactly right. Yeah. It's the way we were trained too. Yeah. When in doubt, wake him up. He's going to yell at you, but all right.
Yes.
It's the right thing to do.
Yes, absolutely. So left there. And what was also neat was because of in SEAL team, the squadron, form up and this new way of doing business, a lot of guys in my peer group did the same thing. It's like we did our first tours. Yes, 9/11 happened, but then everybody, because, nobody knew if this was going to be a long war yet. So we were still on cycle. And so a lot of my peers were on disassociated tours. And in that nature, we would come across each other or work as you and I are, on VTCs and coordinate things. And so it was great. So, got done with that. And then I ended up back to SEAL Team 3, I was Lieutenant Riggins in Korea. And now I'm Lieutenant Riggins and, get kind of what they call the creme de la creme in SEAL Team, your first little company commander, platoon commander for us. I think division head probably is equivalent on a boat. But, for us at the time, I mean, that's what all the officers were gunning for. Guys were always going to stay in SEAL Team for the most part, to do that job. And then after that job, you might start to see some attrition, maybe not, but everybody was gunning for that. And so I was really excited because SEAL Team 3 had been, if you go back to originally, I had orders there, but then I went to 1. Well, SEAL Team 3 at the time, we were regionally organized through the 90s, and they were the Middle East team from the West Coast. And so they were really the only guys that were doing something that we considered cool.
Right.
Nonetheless, it was, everybody was pulling their weight. But I was excited. And obviously at this point, I had spent 2 years, there was Afghanistan, now Iraq had kicked off. And so, I was excited to be at that team because they just seemed to have, and this may sound terrible, but they just seem to have the lucky timing of always being involved in very, again, cool, lots of operations for SEAL Team. Because as you know, you can deploy and it's a downtime and you're not doing a lot. Yeah. There's other
people don't understand that. People don't understand that. I talk about that when you train to get to do your job, you want to do your job, right? I mean, it's fun to train. It's fun to get ready, but you really want to do your duty, right? You want to actually do it. And I remember during the first Gulf War, one of the first submarines got a chance to fire missiles in the first Gulf War, and us as a submarine community, it was the first time a submarine had been used in a warfare situation since World War II, and we were all just like, how do I get to that command? How do I want to be there. I want to be a part of that.
Yeah.
You train for it. You want to do it. You want to do the mission. So
yeah,
kind of interesting you say that, because I also always felt that way too. We were all jealous that we weren't the boat that got selected for that mission. Right. So
And you're exactly right. Like you feel jealousy or like, oh, and then you're combing through the AARs and the hot washes to pass the lessons learned,
right?
Which is another great leadership tip, which I see, and we do a lot better in the military than some of the counterparts out here where they can learn, is that we rake each other through the coals on those debriefs immediately. And in SEAL team, they were happening as missions were still happening because of the network now that we have, architecture wise, you could almost be getting feedback live. And the reason is because somebody may be going out the door on another part of the world. And, you don't want to have, whether it's a critical gear mistake or tactic mistake. And so we're always learning real time. But that's where it comes from, is that, oh man, those guys got to launch this, and very much the same in SEAL team. It's so funny. The best way I explain it, I came up for my mother, because my mother she's like, she's just convinced, right, that like, I don't know, I'm going to die. God bless her soul. She's still alive. Anyway, I said, Mom, when you see the fire trucks go into a fire, do you stop and panic? And she's like, well, no, it's their job. They're good at it. And I'm like,
right.
Well, that's what my whole background is as well.
Right.
We're good at it. You shouldn't think any different when we, launch off to a deployment. I mean, we're just doing our job, and we really do want to do it.
Right.
So SEAL Team 3 is where I cut my teeth and spent a lot of time there. Two cycles, a little bit of the surge. And again, I was just blessed as a platoon commander to have a phenomenal platoon chief and LPO and junior officers now that, I was really, somewhat capable of mentoring in this, and a lot of great guys. And I just remember that the team, Jocko was there, that was kind of that time frame. And we just really, there was a lot of great things that went on. There was tragedy and some deaths and injuries. But I just remember that we all grew together, and I really appreciated, that rotation time as a platoon commander. Even though things weren't perfect, there was a real sense of we were all together, and the squadrons that I had mentioned before were kind of solidified. And, they'd gone from experimental and troubleshot to, okay, I've got a good product here, a good boat. I can trust the boat. Right. And that really helped SEAL team. And so we went off there, and again, guys rotate in, you have new guys coming in, and I really appreciated it, and I learned, but at the same time, I was starting to get pretty banged up and injured, just training type stuff. And so I was dealing with a lot of that, and it was frustrating because it's kind of like, man, I got to my Super Bowl and, my knee's blown out or whatever.
Yeah. No, I know. Yeah.
And so I fought real hard with medical and stuff to try to, make sure I stayed there, and I did. And later that would, kind of cause this cascading thing where now I tell the young guys, there is a smarter way if you have to be in a physically dominated career, to handle these things. And I didn't handle them well at all. I mean, policies were different, and, opioids were certainly, probably people knew they were a crisis, but in a unit like ours, they were easy to get. And so it was very common for us to be carrying packs of pills because we were all beat up and we wanted to do our duty. And that's going to have lasting effects on some personalities. But nonetheless, gritted through it, still have lifelong relationships. I think we did our job well. Some of it has been publicized, some of it has been made into movies. And that's okay. That's good. I just can't cherish that. I went on to get a battlefield promotion and turn around and do what then we call troop commander. And later then I would take, 300-man force to Iraq back later in that career in the Ramadi area.
Thanks for listening to Deep Leadership. We'll be right back after a brief intermission.
Hey, leaders. If you're anything like me, you drink coffee to power through your morning. But what about in the afternoon? For me, I start getting a little sleepy and unfocused around 2 p.m. So I like to do something to get me recharged and refocused. I've tried a bunch of different energy drinks. I've even tried that stuff that's supposed to last 5 hours. Most are expensive and cause you to crash later in the afternoon. I was introduced to a really good product by a fellow veteran. He told me to try Strikeforce Energy. Strikeforce is a veteran-owned company founded by a Navy SEAL, and their products are all made in the USA. Strikeforce Energy is a liquid flavor pack that you can add to any beverage. It has 0 calories, 0 carbs, and 0 sugar. Each pack contains 80 milligrams of caffeine. I actually add 2 packs and a liter of water in the afternoon. I get my water, my energy, and the great taste of Strikeforce throughout the afternoon. I personally prefer the original flavor. Strikeforce Energy is offering a discount to all the listeners of Deep Leadership. Go to strikeforceenergy.com and enter the discount code I have the watch, one word, I have the watch, for a 20% discount on your order. Strikeforce Energy, fuel for your fight.
We were in the phase of trying to figure out how to turn everything over to the Iraqis. But what I did enjoy, again, was, as you get more senior, more personalities, you understand the game, you should be extremely competent in your tactics and techniques and understanding the left and right limits of, the ethics and morality of warfare and the ever-changing rules of engagement. So I felt pretty competent. But again, I was able to seek out other folks as you can put your teams together that meshed. And I think that's important because there are things I'm good at and there are things I'm not good at leadership wise. And so I would always find, whether it be other officers or warrant officers or senior enlisted, that, could balance me as the quote unquote commander of that troop. And that was very valuable. And it really solidified, that I think sometimes, it takes a team of leaders. Right. We have the triad built in, but, broadening that and really listening to the best advice, this would be the point in my career where I start to see and be in charge of a lot of non-SEALs, support people almost at a 8-to-1 ratio, to go out and do an objective. You had so many more people working behind the scenes. And then they're plugged into the national intelligence architecture and you're doing multi-agency stuff. And it was great, but we, at that point in time, really, we protected some of the very important sheikhs.
Oh, right. Okay.
And we would hit targets. The Anbar Awakening had already happened, but obviously, in keeping the peace, as I like to say it, was just an interesting dynamic. And and so I got a really good, on the job training of Sunni Arab culture. And it was good. And again, I think we did our job well. We got out of there. I've always been proud that I accomplished my missions and kept my people safe. That's something you don't always get to choose, and handled it. And, at that point, then we started something new. It's probably 2 years, but they call it Special Reconnaissance Team 1 now. But we saw the advantage of bringing a lot of intel from multi-disciplines all across the Navy, some joint interagency, and somebody smarter than me got that approved to be inside the SEAL architecture of Navy Special Warfare. And it had some SEALs, had a lot more what we call combat support across the interagency. A lot of guys that you're familiar with cryptologists and things like that. And but they didn't have, we just didn't have enough people because we wanted to be SEAL led. And so I really fought. I wasn't supposed to go there, but I fought to get there because I found it very interesting. I knew how needed it was. Everybody argues about, does ops drive intel or intel drive ops? Unless you're invading a place, maybe for the first 2 days, if you go, ops is driving intel. But other than that, intel is very important, and it's good to have the best. So I became the operations officer there, and that was worldwide support operations to national missions, all the way down to local squadron missions. And so it was a very exciting time because we had a lot of money. It was new, UAVs, all kinds of super secret stuff. Again, plugged into the national architecture. and I loved it. And simultaneously, I was pretty much physically done, beat up. There was not much, honestly, I could do. I was already, I don't know, on my 5th or 6th surgery. And so I felt it was a way I could just still take my experience and try to merge the disciplines of SEAL operator, direct action type units and intelligence, because they don't always get along. People think, we get along. Like those are two different beasts. And this coordination and collaboration has to occur, right, for it to work. Just the same as, drop your ego when you come on the boat and they've got their way and the skipper and the culture. And that can be different from ship to ship, and I'm sure submarine to submarine. But again, we're all there to support each other. And so we had to work through those things. And again, that's where I met Sean Hughes, an intelligence officer, and he was just lights out. Some of these people are so smart. So I really started to enjoy that part of the discipline, because I was starting to realize that, as I became a more senior SEAL officer, the operating days were for the most part done. And, I needed to really get good at the bigger picture. And from there, I went to Leavenworth, again, Command General Staff College, got my master's at Kansas in a SOCOM program that was all about interagency collaboration. And people ask me, well, why? And I say, well, it started with 9/11 because the big lesson learned was we didn't all know how to talk to each other.
Yes. Yeah.
And so between the CIA and other agencies and SOCOM, they put together this cohort, and it was really great because we were able to go there. There's 20 of us in a hodgepodge of that joint force and, get our education. But part of it was classified. So we were able to study real world things to come up with better solutions in interagency collaboration, and then feed it back out to the forces. And then from there, I went out to Guam as the deputy. And I'd been through Guam before, so I knew it wasn't that scary of a place. I've always enjoyed the Pacific. And of course, a couple of submarines were parked right next to my office window on the pier there.
Yeah.
And, just continued to support SEAL squadrons as they came in and worked the whole Pacific theater. And then finally I ended up in the counterterrorism for Europe with Special Operations Command Europe. And that's when, as I like to say, we got behind the curve of ISIS, but then we decided, maybe we should do something. And so the way the geographic boundaries are, we had Turkey was in EUCOM's AOR. Obviously, you had AFRICOM there, but working that, and then you had Central Command work in the Middle East. And so, basically let's get back into the game, kind of started up. And, I was on the planning and staff of all of that. And that was kind of the last thing that I did. The thing I will leave service operationally, strategic wise, is that probably the last thing I did that, I would hope would have helped, meaning I and the group and the whole team of SOCUR, was, we traveled around to countries along with NATO, and America was really trying to educate the rest of the world about foreign fighter flow and the fact that, people were taking passports and just traveling freely to a war zone and then coming back into places like France. And we know what happened. And, Europe was very slow to believe in that. And it was kind of sad because we had all the intelligence and we would share it. But you can't tell another country what to do. You can coordinate with your counterparts. They can see it like we can see it. But in the end of the day, everybody wanted to kind of say, well, if our citizens leave and go to a war zone and commit crimes over there, that's that country's problem. And they're free to come back here. And it's like,
yeah.
So really, the world was rejockeying again in the, in kind of the big NATO community, big, real, counterterrorism nations, of how to deal with that. And then, Russia invaded, post-Olympics. Help me out. I'm having a blank. Russia took over
Crimea. Yeah.
Yeah. So they did Crimea, and then they did Ukraine. And,
Ukraine. Yeah.
Yeah. And then at that time, I was pretty much overcome by injury and bad choices of addiction to the opioids. And I just needed to get fixed. And so I'm always very thankful that the Admiral, not only the SEAL Admiral, but Admiral McCraven, head of SOCOM, what they did is they sent me to Homa Record and let me get my surgeries, and then I retired.
Okay.
And I really feel like it was a great handshake. I felt when I was done at 20 years that I did what they asked of me, and I did to the best of my ability. And I felt that not only the Navy SEAL team, but the country held up its end of the bargain. And I ended up retiring in 2018 with a lot of information, a lot of friendships, a lot of lessons, my family intact. And I'd love to go do it over again.
Yeah, which is unusual. And in Navy,
right.
There's a lot of divorce in Navy. And so being able to keep your family intact is a big plus. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I kind of did the gambit, which is, I think, pretty typical. As I like to say, I'm just kind of a very average SEAL officer, and had some unique struggles to myself, but there's unique struggles. And, moving forward, my new passion is I even while I was on active duty, I got introduced to some sports teams, and as starting out as a sports guy, that was neat. And I've found some goodness on both sides from them, learning things and me, and realizing that demographic is young kids, 18 to 22. It's what we deal with a lot in the military.
Right.
And so I thought, wow, that might be a way I can pass on knowledge and help young people achieve what they want. And even middle-aged people. And then from there, it's like, well, businesses may enjoy some of this stuff too. And so, got my partner who's in Performance Mountain, who's a sports psychiatrist. He's really great at his craft. Those are people that SEALs and I think just military people in general probably wouldn't associate with. But you have to meet each individual. It's just kind of like every SEAL isn't some superhero. We're just people, and we work really hard at what we do, but you've got to get to know the person, and we found some synergy there. And so that's been rewarding. But I look at my mission now going forward where I completely believe that there's times that you need to, bombs and bullets and that need to be there to stop evil, and they can change things. And it is needed. You need that protection from rogue elements and evil people. There's just evil in the world. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I don't do that anymore. And it's like, well, what can I do? And I was like, I try to change one person at a time, change the world one person at a time, so that hopefully there's not as much evil, whenever I get off this planet. And I try to do that by being very authentic and sharing my story, not just what I've learned in SEAL team and my own education through life, but with my family, with sports, and with business, and then my struggles too. Because as we talked about, I think that there's not, for lack of a better term, I think that there's a lot of people that don't see the value in, if you need help or you have issues, especially in the male culture, to go get it. And I think we did a phenomenal job in the military, better than the generations before. But I still think there's a lot of gaps, and I think it hurts readiness. I think it hurts morale. I think we lose good people to some of these things. And that's okay. I'm very satisfied that the force my grandpa was a part of way back in the day, made it better militarily, the country for us, then the next generation, the next. And I felt like in my time where I saw Naval Special Warfare grow to, where I saw the Navy and the country, I felt like we pushed the rock down the road and made it better. Could there be tons of other things? Of course, but that's for the next crew to do.
Yeah, the next generation will be better, even better.
Yeah, right? Absolutely. And they are being better because there's so many other tools. But what I can provide, if they ask, without prying into them, is just, experience and what I learned, and hopefully to help them learn quicker, faster, and accomplish their goals. And so I just try to do it on three fronts, right? The military, if it's that audience, business, and then sports. And you hit a pretty good demographic, and also women. Right in the middle of SEAL team, I got to help a women's volleyball team here in Nebraska. And that was epic. My wife was a player, and I have two daughters. But generally, SEALs is a male-dominated culture, although now we've integrated and I had a lot of females I took to combat with me. And our team at Team 3 there really, like I said, I mean, Team 3 was epic. Love it. Just talked to a guy yesterday, talking about, what everybody's doing right now and things like that. So there's just a lot of great lessons. I don't think they're exclusive, like because I was a SEAL, it's just the way it is. But it's certainly unique. And I realize it gives me a platform that people sometimes open their ears to where they might not have to somebody else. And so I feel like I have a responsibility to try to do it right and to pass it on. So that's my career in a nutshell, even though that was 35 minutes.
I love it. It's funny. I wrote a bunch of questions, but I know you because I listened to your podcast, and I was like, I probably just need one question and just let you go. So I love it. I like I said, because I follow your podcast, I think I know your story in a little bit, but I think this is really helpful to understand, your whole background and what you've been through and how it creates what you want to do going forward. And I think your idea of passing it on to the next group is something. The reason why I write about leadership, why I do this podcast, is I really want to try to create a world with better leaders and try to pass on, the experiences I had in the military and in 22 years in corporate America to others, so they can be better leaders when they get that opportunity.
Yeah.
So,
well, and that makes the world a better place. I mean, you just try to impact it where you can.
Right, exactly. And so, like you said, and I like what you said one person at a time, and try to make that next generation, that next group, so maybe they learn some of the lessons without having to go through the hardships that you had to go through.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh God, with especially my young officers, when I was more senior, like, they were yoga, they were doing this, and I talked to them about the different. First I would give them the history that I understood of the teams kind of prior to me, and then, my generation. And I would say, don't worry about guys giving you crap about that. Like, you need to stay healthy.
Right.
I'm an example of, I did it wrong. Would I change it? No, because it's made me who I am. But if it started over again and I had this knowledge, you're doing the right things. And so, creating that culture that it's, again, like, it isn't national security, but I want you to tell me, and I want you to, tell the old man, the skipper, because we have the experience to help you work through it. Right.
Right.
And no matter what it is, right. To get to that trust level, but that's what I learned. I mean, really what I learned was it's all about people. And, I know what the paperwork says, quote unquote, Commander Jack Riggins did. So does everybody in the military. We all have those fitness reports and things, and, but in the end of the day, I just did my job. I feel very average. But that was good enough. I mean, I did the standard, but more importantly, it was because of the people that grew me. Yes, I had the drive and the clay, and I was just barely smart enough to listen. And maybe if I don't go to SEAL Team 1 and have that very kind of in your face experience, which, is kind of going away these days, and that's okay. But I needed that to kind of shock me into really understanding that I don't know everything, and I might think I'm cool. But if I want to do this career and do it right, I have to listen. I have to seek out people that know things I don't know. I have to understand my strengths. I have to work on my weaknesses. I have to constantly improve. And after a while, it just became kind of my new way. But, I am who I am on all fronts in the military because of all, again, mostly the senior enlisted and certainly warrant officers and some officers, and not just SEALs. I mean, Marines,
right.
Green Berets, Air Force people. I'm just thankful. I'm very thankful because it's made me who I am. And again, I want to pass it on. And then, because of my own unique choices with addiction and, abuse as a child, well, hey, let's just add that in there too, because that's part of it. And I know that there's got to be lots of people that struggle with that as well. So love it. And, my family, like you said, I mean, I can't say that enough. They're always like, don't talk about us on the podcast. I'm like, my God, you're my family. But
right. Yeah.
we know how rare that is to make it through a career like that. And, my wife from start to finish. I mean, I can remember being in Hell Week and doing rock portage. And back then they used to let civilian, well, you can see that because it's at Hotel Del Coronado. But, like I'm coming out of the water, and like my wife is standing there with girlfriends like, "Hell, hi."
Oh, like, really?
Right. Like, oh my God, I'm going to get kicked out.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah.
That's neat. Well, before we leave, talk a little bit about what you're doing on your podcast and with your crew, the Darkside of Elite crew, in the middle of this coronavirus. What you're doing and trying to do to try to help people. And I really appreciate what you're doing because, I think you have a lot of experience in crisis leadership and crisis management and being in these tough environments. And I think you're trying to pass it on to, the rest of the country is probably the first time ever they're way outside their comfort zone. So maybe talk a little bit about what you're doing with that, and then we'll wrap up so I don't get in trouble with Greta. So
yeah, for sure. We don't want that. Darkside Elite podcast, it's just kind of unfiltered access to my life and my thoughts, and my guests. And we just hit all subjects. But what's interesting is, so we were switching over to, a pay model, for part of it with deeper content, if you want. And we were literally ready to go hot with that, when this happened. And I was like, oh God, no. Like, I don't want to do that. It just didn't feel right to go out. And, so part of that vision was, that site was going to be the crew. Right. And you could sign up. And like I said, there's different levels, and I'm not marketing. This is what happened, but that will be there one day in the future when this all ends and we get back to normal. And so we were talking, and I said, and we have all these podcasts with great people, but it's not COVID because we taped before. Right. And I was like, we should just start the Facebook page, so Darkside of the Elite crew on Facebook, you just go to it and we accept you, and basically create a community forum that right now is just focused on what's going on with COVID. How are we dealing with it? Let's not talk politics. Let's not get too crazy on those things, but just what are we struggling with as people and what's going good? Because my experience tells me that, like you said, a lot of people, this is the first time kind of out of their battle rhythm on a mass scale. Individually, but on a mass scale. And as each day has gone on and each week has gone on, those of us like you and I who have been in situations where we're just kind of out there, we probably have a lot more resiliency to these things. But we all know that at some point we hit our point too, where we're like, that's why we rotate in the military.
Right. Exactly. Right? Yeah. Yeah.
And I said, geez, because at first I kind of giggled about COVID. I was like, oh God.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't paying attention. And then I really started to, some other people hit me up and they're like, hey, Jack. And I was like, well, I'm just, I'm being me. I'm being funny.
Right.
But, we need to do the right things. And then I was like, no, so we created that group again, just to spread the basic knowledge of where we're at. We are in stop the spread as a society, as a world. And so get that basic information out and just keep regurgitating it. But at the same time, whoever wants to join, create that environment where, hey, what's going on in your life? Because if you are listening to the Darkside of Elite podcast, that's exactly what we do. We just kind of, we will have national people, we will have local people. You may catch me talking about my wife and kids and my struggles there, or God knows what, because that's real life. Right. And so now real life is going to be hyperdrive because we can't go anywhere. The things that are little and bother us at the house are going to bother us more frequently in things. And this is unprecedented now.
It really is,
as each day has gone on, it's unprecedented for our society and the world. And so, I know that I'm a pretty open guy. My producer, Scott, is open and a nice guy, but he's different than me. And so we just said, hey, let's just start it and start inviting people and start spreading the word. And everything, while COVID is going to be geared towards talking about that on the pod, finding experts, and really just to basically tell everybody you're not alone.
That's
like
great.
we're here.
That's great. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And wherever you want to go with it, we'll go with it. I think Sunday we're just going to attempt a live, I'll probably turn on the camera and be here. And whatever questions. I mean, because I think that when you talk about crisis management at the big level or even the individual level, the number one thing, right, is always try to stay calm, right? You know, getting crazy is contagious, being calm is contagious, panic is contagious. All these things, you know, if there's a fire in your plant down there, like we've got to have order, we've got to get it done. But part of that, because that happens to us all, is communicating. I mean, it's the one tool that we have to let other people know who may have experience how to help us. It's like I tell my children, I don't know what's going on in your head. Right. And
gotta have that dialogue, face to face. Yep.
And so it's just like, well, we'll start a community. You know, who knows? There's already been people just with autistic children that have bonded, because that has its unique challenges. And I mean, they would have not linked up before. You know, a lot of people obviously losing their businesses and stuff that creates stress. And I don't have all the great answers, but what I know with regard to the human condition of it all is that we can reduce panic and fear by knowledge, the right knowledge, right? Because it is difficult to sift through some of it right now, given that we are in an election cycle. I think it's a lot cleaner now, and that's good. And then it's also then when whatever is causing that, to be able to communicate it and feel safe to do it. And so that's what we're trying to do is, you know, if we see it, we'll respond. And in that community effort, it's a way for people to come together digitally, opposed to, you know, in small towns, we do that. We do this all the time in America, but it's when all of a sudden something like this happens, well, use the tools at your disposal, which is digital technology, to do the same thing. And so, and if there's, you know, and if there's big issues, I literally have a psychiatrist, you know, and he's on there tracking. And, you know, if we see a topic that becomes really common, then I'll throw him on the pod and we'll get his advice on it. I mean, that's literally great. In any normal day, you'd be paying $500 to hear that. Right. You know what I mean?
That's really good. And that's why I like, that's why I wanted to get you on, because I think what you're doing is great. So let's wrap it up here. Cool. Can you just give the folks information how to find your podcast, your website, and also maybe the Darkside of Elite crew, where they can find all that?
Yeah, absolutely. So first place you want to go is just the darksideofelite.com. That's the podcast website. From there, there's a link that'll take you to the Facebook group right away to join the community. If you're on Facebook, you would just go search the Darkside of Elite crew, and boom, you can join the group, or you don't have to, and you'll be in. And those are the best ways to access that right now. Once we get kind of going back to normal, you know, we'll have the normal interviews, but right now we're trying to do COVID specific stuff that's hopefully helpful. You know, I'm on all the social platforms, Twitter, Instagram. It's just Riggins_Jack. And then, you know, performancemountain.com is the consulting company. But to be honest, right now, nobody should be worried about that.
Yeah,
everybody should be worried about.
There'll be a time for that, right?
There'll be a time for that. Everybody should just be worried about social distancing, keep yourself clean, wash your hands. And, you know, if you feel you have the symptoms, call a provider that can direct you to where our medical community is. And other than that, you know, just stay together in each way you can. And remember, it's all about people and to communicate, because that's the only way that all of us can understand and begin to understand. And oftentimes, as I like to say, I think a lot of us inherently have a lot of the answers. It's just sometimes we need another person to guide us to what we already know.
Right.
And if I can be that for you, I'd love to. But in the same time, that's why it's the crew. Because you know what? Crews, as you know, can be very effective.
The collective wisdom of a team is always better than just one person. Yes.
Well said.
Yes. Well, very good, Jack. Thank you very much for being on the show. I really do appreciate that. And really, everybody who's listening, go to the Darkside of Elite podcast, follow that podcast. It's a great one. Get onto Facebook, find the Darkside of Elite crew if you want to, join in the community talking about COVID and how it's affecting us. So do that, because I think it's a great resource. So you get a chance to listen to Jack and his team and what they're talking about, and it can help you get through this time. So I appreciate it, Jack. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, John.
Well, that's it for today. So thank you for listening to Deep Leadership. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and share so we can continue to build a world with better bosses. Until next time, this is John Rennie saying take care and lead well.
Thank you for listening to Deep Leadership.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you for all you do.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. For more information and updates, please visit our website at www.deepleadershippodcast.com or johnsrennie.com. Until next time, take care.